Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Hello, you guys. Today we are here with another low-key unsung hero of the civil rights movement. I want you guys to meet Mrs. Ruby Doris Smith Robinson. And yes, I had to look down because the girl got 4 names. Okay, now let's get to the point. Miss Ruby, she was SNCC's administrative secretary, field secretary. So she coordinated everyone also in all the different locations throughout the South. And then she also was the first woman on SNCC's executive committee. So later on, you'll hear how she was kind of frustrated with the lack of gender equality within SNCC, which many other women had stated in my research, but we'll get there. Now, born in Atlanta, Miss Ruby was the second of 7 children born to Alice and J.T. Smith, and her parents were a hairstylist. So Ruby was shielded most of her life because her parents worked solely in the Black community. Her dad was a minister, and also he helped to move furniture as well. Now, Ruby was conscious of her Blackness. Oh yeah, and she was in Atlanta. she was conscious of her Blackness, but she admitted that her only direct dealing with whites was either them ignoring her, or she in turn ignoring them, or throwing rocks at. She remembered throwing rocks at whites as a child. So talk about being sheltered, being able to throw rocks at white people, baby, never in Mississippi. There was one time when her sister recalled they went to an ice cream shop, and the shop person handed them the cone without a tissue wrapped, i.e. touching her food, and we ain't going. And she was like, I will not be paying for that. I don't want that. Miss Ruby, she was another woman, a force to be reckoned with. I will say that, especially in a world dominated by men, which you'll hear from other SNCC activists saying. Now, Ruby told her sister that it was her mission in life to set Black people free, and she said, I will never rest until it happens. I will die for that cause. And here's a picture of Ruby in the middle with her 2 sisters, very gorgeous ladies. At the age of 13, she watched on television the Montgomery bus boycotts, as well as the sit-ins that took place in Greensboro. And she felt like, okay, there's a way for me to fight for these injustices. And so she enrolled later at the age of 16 at Spelman College and began her nonviolent activism to integrate Atlanta. As a student at Spelman, she participated in the Atlanta student movement, which led her to go to a conference held by SNCC at Shaw University. The first meeting that she ever went to was in February 1961 at 18, where she volunteered to go to the Rock Hill, South Carolina, to support the Rock Hill 9, who had set in at a restaurant and refused bail. And she and Diane Nash were strong supporters of no bill. I forgot the saying goes, but no bill, we stand in jail, baby. And so she, Diane Nash, Charles Sherrod, Charles Jones, and others who popularized the jail no bill, they went to Rock Hill, Maryland, and they were there in jail for 30 days, where she served out her time on a chain gang, baby. She was fearless. And in the spring of, and this is coming from a very spoiled girl who was sheltered. In spring of 1961, Smith left her position as executive secretary of the Atlanta student movement and dropped out of Spelman to become a full-time Southern campus coordinator for SNCC. Now, it's still spring, but in May 17, 1961, Miss Ruby, who's seen there with a purse in front of her leg, leaning on some dude's shoulder with sunglasses, she joined the Freedom Riders, the second leg of Freedom Riders from Nashville, Tennessee to Montgomery, Alabama. This is a photo of them on their way down via train. And she was violently attacked and beaten in Montgomery and arrested in Jackson, Mississippi, and she served 45 days in Parchman Penitentiary. Now, in the fall of 1961, She reapplied to Spelman College, and this is with the recommendation of Martin Luther King Jr. He told her to go back to school, honey bun, and she returned and continued her activity in the Atlanta student movement. She would organize sitting at lunch counters. That was prior, but since it was desegregated at lunch counters, they wasn't doing that anymore. They decided to segregate hospitals. So at one demonstration, she walked in, Miss Ruby walked into the hospital, and she walked in the whites only section, and they were like, hey, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here, and you don't look sick anyway. So then she spilled her guts literally on the counter and said, is this sick enough for you? In 1963, Miss Ruby had become SNCC's administrative secretary and a full-time member of SNCC, and she worked in an office or whatever. She worked in an office doing day-to-day organization, financial coordinating, and administrating. She was in charge of the summer voter registration project in Mississippi as far as coordinating everything. And she was responsible for the Sojourner Truth motor fleet, which provided civil rights workers with transportation throughout the country. I mean, not only the South, but also the West. And she was a big proponent of don't waste my time, honey bun. They were like, one time some dude was out west and he missed the time frame he was supposed to catch his ride on the Sojourner Truth motor transportation route. And she said, baby doll, that's your problem. Don't play with our time. Don't play with our dime. Don't play with our time. And told him to find his own way back. And this is a picture of her next to Mr. Stokely. They both served around the same time. When he became chairman of SNCC, she was on the executive committee. And Mr. Stokely said that Miss Ruby was convinced that there was nothing that she could not do. She was a tower of strength. She did note that there were problems of sexism in SNCC and just in society. Men had the final say in the decisions in SNCC. And that's why it was important to note that she was the first leader, had executive leadership role in SNCC, where she exercised power over men. And one time they were like, they thought women were just going to clean up the office, take the notes, do all the little minute details. And she was like, until we have gender equality, it's Nick, we ain't taking no more minutes. Like, she was not here for the nonsense. There was another time where SNCC sent a delegation to Guinea, where Guinea was this country that was formerly ruled by French, but then they decided, we're no longer doing that colonialism, but we're going to accept your financial assistance, but you can't rule over us anymore. And it was a country that was just fully ruled by Africans, blacks at the time. And so a lot of civil rights activists went over there. I stated later that Mr. Stokely had went over to Africa as well to help. But in their visit, they were told there was no seats for them on the plane. Baby doll had Miss Ruby, baby doll, sat on the tarmac and was like, we ain't moving. We ain't going nowhere till you give us our seats. And they gave them their seats, honey bun. She was not here for any tomfoolery and would put her foot down in a segregated time, in the 60s. Again, a force to be reckoned with if she throwing rocks at people, at white kids, child, because, you couldn't even whistle in Mississippi. Now, in 1964, she devoted most of her time to SNCC, but she did get married, and she had a son, who she named Kenneth Teray Robinson, in honor of the Guinea president. Here's a picture of Miss Ruby and her son, who they call Teray. Ruby did shift her view from Black activism to Black nationalism after visiting Guinea. And she was seen as not really wanting whites to have a leadership role in SNCC, because I kind of get coming from advocating for people with HIV or hepatitis C, you need to have persons in that community actually taking leadership or advising leadership on advocacy. You can't advocate for a group of people in a community that you don't specifically belong to. Now, granted, we're all Americans, but you won't know their troubles ever from their eyes. So if they want to be in leadership, let them be in leadership. Now, she did return to work 2 weeks after giving birth, and she graduated Spelman, and physical education was her degree. And unfortunately, Miss Ruby did die at a young age, 26 years old, from rare blood disease and cancer. So she died October 7th, 1967.